She was just a tired waitress working the night shift at a roadside cafe, trying to make ends meet, until a soaked, silent stranger walked in, asking for nothing but a warm plate of food. What she didn't know? That one simple act of kindness would spark a chain of events leading to a military base, 300 saluting soldiers, and a secret that would change her life forever. You won't believe how this story ends. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Now let's jump into the story. Rain slipped down the windows of Willow and Pine Cafe in long, quiet streaks, tapping the glass like a tired lullaby. The dinner rush had ended hours ago, and now the only sounds were the soft clinks of dishes and the low hum of the old fridge in the back. Nina Clay, in her faded apron and scuffed sneakers, moved behind the counter like someone who knew every squeaky tile by heart. She wiped down a table that no one had touched, her hands aching from hours of work. It had been a slow night like most lately. A couple of travelers had come through, some locals stopped by for pie, but mostly it had been quiet. Too quiet for tips, and far too cold for comfort. Nina pulled her sleeves down over her wrists, the old heater doing little more than sighing into the room. It was nearly midnight when the door creaked open, and the bell above it gave a shaky jingle. A gust of cold wind followed, sweeping in the smell of wet pavement and something else. Something. Sad a young man stepped in, soaked to the bone, his coat hung unevenly, one sleeve torn near the elbow. His boots left tracks of mud across the tiled floor. His hair was messy, and his eyes were the kind of clear that made you think he hadn't had much sleep. He paused, just inside the doorway, his shoulders slightly hunched like he wasn't sure if he should come in or leave. Nina looked up from the register. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither said anything. Then he stepped forward, slow and cautious. "I'm not here to cause any trouble," he said softly. His voice was quiet, like it didn't want to bother anyone. I need something warm. A sandwich, anything. I can't pay, but I'll wash dishes or sweep floors. I'll earn—" Nina didn't answer right away. She looked at him closely. He was young, maybe mid-20s, but something about him felt older. Not in years, but in weight, like he'd seen too many long nights and not enough warm mornings. Still, there was no begging in his voice, just a quiet dignity wrapped in cold and hunger. Behind her on the warming rack sat a plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes and green beans, a canceled order from earlier. She had almost thrown it out, but hadn't yet. Maybe now she knew why. Without a word, Nina picked it up, grabbed a cup, and poured steaming coffee into it. She set both on the counter, in front of him. "Someone changed their mind," she said. "Seems a waste to toss it." The man blinked. His hands trembled as he reached for the fork. "Thank you," he whispered. "I mean it." "You don't have to," Nina replied gently, already reaching for extra napkins. "Just eat." He smiled. A small one, but it carried something real. That moment shattered like glass when a voice cut through the room. "Nina," came the sharp tone. It was Mr. Halpern, the cafe owner, stepping out from the kitchen. His expression was sour, his lips drawn tight. "What's going on?" She turned calmly. It was a returned meal. "He's hungry." "I don't care if he's the mayor," Halpern snapped. "We don't give food away. This isn't a charity." Nina's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "It would have gone in the trash." "Not your decision," he growled. "You want to feed every drifter that walks through the door? Use your own paycheck." The young man had set down his fork. "I'll leave," he mumbled. "No," Nina said quickly. Then she turned to her boss. "Take it from my tips." Halpern crossed his arms. "Then you're fired." Silence followed, the kind of silence that hangs heavy. Nina didn't shout, didn't cry. She just untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. Then she nodded once, walked to the door, and stepped back into the cold. Outside, the rain hadn't let up. It fell harder now, like the sky had grown tired of holding it back. Nina wrapped her arms around herself. Her coat was too thin, her shoes were soaked, and her heart felt like it was dragging behind her in the street. She didn't hear the footsteps until they caught up. The man, Jonas he said his name was, had followed her. He stood beside her, his coat pulled tight, water dripping from his hair. "I'll never forget that," he said. His voice cracked, part from the cold, part from something else. "You didn't treat me like garbage. You saw me." Nina looked at him, really looked. He was still soaked, still worn down, but there was something in him that hadn't broken. Not yet. "Everyone deserves to be seen," she said softly. Then she turned and walked away, not knowing that her simple act, the plate no one wanted, had just changed everything. The cold didn't care that the sun had come out. Even weeks after that rainy night, the wind in Pine Hollow still nipped at your cheeks and slipped under doors. Nina Clay wrapped her scarf twice around her neck as she pushed open the side door of the old church hall. The sign above the entrance had half the letters missing, but everyone knew what it meant: the free meal center. Inside, the smell of warm stew and baked bread drifted through the room. Volunteers moved between tables, pouring coffee and handing out donated coats. The noise was gentle, soft conversation, a few children's giggles, and spoons clinking in bowls. It wasn't fancy, but it felt alive. Nina had started coming, here after losing her job. Marvin Ortiz, a retired trucker who ran the food pantry, had found her crying behind the building one night after she gave away her last can of soup to a neighbor. "You got more kindness than groceries," Marvin had said with a chuckle. "Let's put that to work." And she had. Now she helped in the kitchen most afternoons, tying her apron with steady hands and chopping onions while the sun dipped behind the trees. Today, she stepped inside and stopped cold. At the far side of the hall, next to a table piled high with sandwiches, stood a familiar face: Jonas Ridge. His hair was shorter now. He was clean-shaven, wearing a second-hand wool coat and a knit cap that didn't quite cover his ears. He laughed gently with an older man, helping him carry a plate back to his seat. His hands, though still rough, moved with care. There was something different about him, like a lamp someone had finally plugged in. Nina blinked. Part of her wanted to walk away, give him space. The other part, the louder one, carried her forward. "Hey," she said, her voice unsure. Jonas turned. When he saw her, his face lit up like sunrise. "Nina," he said softly. "I was hoping I'd see you again." She smiled. "Didn't expect you to be the one handing out sandwiches." "I remember yours," he said, reaching under the table. He handed her a wrapped sandwich. "Turkey, with cranberry spread. You mentioned it was your favorite." She took it slowly, her fingers brushing his. It was warm. "You didn't have to," she said. He shook his head. "You gave me my first real meal in days. This is the first one I get to share." Their eyes held for a second longer than needed. Around them, life kept moving. Bowls clattered, kids giggled, the coffee machine hissed. But between the two of them, something quiet bloomed. A small, safe kind of silence. Nina stayed that day longer than she planned. She and Jonas worked side by side without needing to say much. They passed out cocoa at the door, helped a man find his missing glove, and cleaned up folding chairs at the end of the shift. By the time they left, the sky was deep blue and the stars were poking through. "You look different," she said as they walked. He chuckled. "A shower and a shave will do that." "No," she said, glancing sideways. "It's more than that." He didn't answer at first, then. "Some days I wake up and still feel like I'm stuck out there, wherever there was. But places like this, people like you, they remind me that maybe I'm not as lost as I thought." The next morning, Nina found a small paper cup of chamomile tea waiting for her on the front steps of her apartment. Wrapped around it was a napkin with 3 simple words in messy handwriting. "Still here." "Jay," she laughed, a soft, real laugh that startled even her cat, Miso, who blinked from the windowsill like he'd just seen a ghost. Days passed, then weeks. Jonas kept showing up, At the shelter, at the pantry, even at the bus stop with a thermos when Nina's cough wouldn't go away. He fixed the broken drawer in her kitchen without asking, and left a daisy on her table after hearing her say once, quietly, that they reminded her of her grandma. He never made it romantic. Not yet. Just kindness. Steady, warm, wordless kindness. One snowy evening, Nina was slicing apples for dessert at the center when Gracie Lee, a bright-eyed 9-year-old who came by often, wandered over. "Miss Nina?" she asked, biting into a cookie. "Is Jonas your boyfriend?" Nina blinked. "No, sweetheart." Gracie squinted like this answer made no sense. "But he brings you flowers and soup, and you smile like sunshine when he's around." Nina laughed, brushing hair out of the girl's face. "Then, maybe he's just someone with warm hands." Gracie looked puzzled. "That's a weird thing to call someone." Nina smiled softly. "It's better than calling them a stranger." That night, as she locked up the kitchen and stepped into the snow, Nina felt something shift. She didn't know who Jonas had been before. She didn't know what story he was hiding behind those kind eyes and quiet strength. But for now, she knew this. He showed up day after day, and in a world that often forgot how to stay, that counted for something. Maybe even everything. The knock at the door came just after dawn. Nina Clay rubbed her eyes, still wrapped in her old diner uniform. She had fallen asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest and a half-empty cup of tea on the coffee table. Rain whispered outside, steady and soft. Her cat, Miso, meowed sleepily from the windowsill. Another knock. This time, firm. She shuffled to the door, barefoot, brushing hair from her face. When she opened it, her breath caught. 2 soldiers stood, on her porch, not in combat gear. These men wore formal uniforms, pressed and polished, the kind you only saw in parades or ceremonies. Their faces were calm but serious. "Miss Nina Clay?" one asked, tall and square-shouldered. "Yes?" she answered, her voice small. "We've been sent to escort you to Fort Verlin," the other replied. "There's a ceremony. You're the guest of honor." Nina blinked. "I think you have the wrong person." The taller soldier shook his head. "No, ma'am. This invitation comes from Major Jonas Ridge." The name landed like a stone dropped in still water. Neighbors peeked through curtains. One elderly man from across the street stepped out onto his porch. A little boy stopped riding his scooter and just stared. Nina stood frozen in the doorway, her heart hammering. She felt like she was floating above herself, watching this happen to someone else. "We'll explain on the way," the soldier said gently, motioning to the black SUV parked outside. Nina grabbed her coat, still unsure why she was going, but somehow knowing she had to. The ride was long and quiet. Outside the window, trees passed in a blur. She didn't ask questions. Her mind was already full of them. Fort Verlin was massive. Its gates opened wide as their vehicle approached. Beyond the fences, Nina could see row after row of buildings, training fields, and flagpoles whipping in the wind. But it wasn't the base that made her breath stop. It was the people, lined up. Across the central field were rows upon rows of soldiers, over 300 of them, standing shoulder to shoulder, perfectly still, perfectly silent. They filled the space like statues, all facing forward in quiet attention. The SUV stopped. Nina stepped out, rain lightly misting her cheeks. Her boots crunched on the gravel. She was led down a long, narrow path between the soldiers. None of them moved, but every single one of them raised their hand in salute. She didn't understand. She didn't dare understand. At the far end of the path, standing on a small platform beneath a line of flags, was Jonas. But not the Jonas she knew. He wore a deep green military uniform, crisp and decorated with medals that caught the morning light. His posture was tall and proud, but his eyes, those same gentle eyes, looked right at her like they had that first rainy night in the diner. Nina's steps slowed. Jonas stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and strong. "My name is Major Jonas Ridge," he began. "I serve with a humanitarian division that works undercover to assess and support areas often overlooked. Nina's heart thudded harder. This couldn't be real. Could it? I was sent to Pine Hollow not as a soldier, he continued, but as a shadow. To observe, to understand, and to see if kindness still survived when no one was watching. He looked directly at her now, and I met someone who proved it does. The crowd behind her didn't move, but the air was heavy with stillness. You didn't know who I was, Jonas said, stepping off the platform and coming closer. You didn't ask. You didn't expect anything. You saw a stranger and offered. What little you had. You gave me a warm meal and a kind word when I had nothing. Nina's eyes filled with tears. She didn't even realize she was holding her breath. He smiled gently, then turned to the crowd. She reminded me what dignity looks like. She reminded me what it means to be seen. Then he faced her again. These soldiers, he said, gesturing to the formation, aren't here to scare or to parade. They're here to honor, to show what happens when one simple act of kindness ripples through more lives than we can count. Nina's hands trembled. But I'm just a waitress, she whispered. Jonas stepped forward, close enough, to speak without raising his voice. No, he said. You're the reason I came back to myself. You're the reason this uniform still means something. For a moment, Nina couldn't speak. The world around her was still, as if even the sky had paused to listen. And then, one by one, the soldiers broke formation. Not to leave, but to approach. Each stepped forward, slow and respectful, offering a silent salute or a simple nod. Line in the rain, a tribute to a woman who had once given a plate of food to someone no one else had seen. The Old Town Library had been closed for nearly 10 years. Dust filled the windows, vines curled around the broken steps, and birds had made homes in the corners of the roof. But now paint brushed fresh against the bricks. New windows gleamed. And inside, where silence used to live, laughter and the smell of baked bread filled the air. Nina Clay stood in the center of the new Willow and Hearth Community Center, sleeves rolled up, apron tied, a wooden spoon in one hand and a tray of golden cornbread in the other. The room buzzed with life, volunteers setting tables, kids folding paper animals, elderly neighbors chatting over soup. She never imagined this would be her life, not after getting fired from the diner, not after that strange, rainy night when she handed a warm meal to a stranger, and yet, here she was. The center had been built with help from a military outreach program. Quiet funding, no press. But the heart of the place wasn't money. It was people. People who believed that no one should go hungry or unseen. Nina had become the soul of the center, without meaning to. She just showed up every day, like she always had. Jonas was there too, always nearby. Never loud. Never asking for attention. Every Saturday morning he brought flowers from the farmer's market. Wild ones, sunflowers, daisies, once even a small cactus with a pink bloom. He never said much, just left them by the sink with a note that usually read, "For the keeper of the flame." He fixed what broke. He taught the kids how to fold napkins into birds and stars. He sat with the veterans and listened, really listened, while they told stories no one else had time for. But he never pushed. Never tried to define what they were. Nina didn't mind. Their rhythm was quiet but full. She was used to people leaving when life got messy. But Jonas never left. He simply stayed. One Thursday afternoon, a small girl tugged at Nina's apron. Her name was Isla. She had curly hair, jelly on her chin, and a serious expression on her face. "Miss Nina?" she asked. "Is Mr. Jonas your husband?" Nina smiled. "No, sweetheart." "Boyfriend?" Nina shook her head. The girl frowned. "Then what is he?" Nina knelt beside her, brushing a crumb from Isla's cheek. "He's someone who made me believe again." "In what?" Nina looked over at Jonas, who was across the room showing a boy how to tie a scarf like a superhero cape. "That not everyone leaves," she whispered. That night, long after the doors had closed and the last bowl was washed, Nina returned to the kitchen to clean up. By the sink sat a small tin box. Not fancy, old, and a little rusty. but clearly placed with care. On top of it was a folded note, for the one who gave me back my breath. Nina opened the lid. Inside was a silver chain with a tiny spoon-shaped pendant. Engraved on the back were the words, "For the girl who fed my hope." Her breath caught. She traced the letters with her thumb, heart swelling. Behind her, she heard quiet footsteps. Jonas stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, his jacket dusted with flour from helping the kids make cookies earlier. "That spoon," he said softly, "was my mother's. She used to say a warm meal made with love could fix more than any doctor." He stepped closer. "After my last deployment, I stopped believing that. I stopped believing in people, in myself. I came back, but I didn't feel here. The army gave me a different kind of mission. Go find the places the world forgot. Look for people who still give without asking. People who make things better just by showing up." Nina didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat felt too tight. "I found you," he said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a dog tag. It had been re-engraved. "You saved a soldier's soul." He placed it gently in her hand. "You never needed proof," he said. "But I did." She smiled through tears. "You showed up." That was enough. They stood there, quiet, the scent of soup and cinnamon still lingering in the air. The next morning, just after sunrise, a boy about 8 years old walked into the center. His hoodie was too big and his hands were stuffed deep into the pockets. His shoes were wet, his eyes wide. Nina knelt beside him. "Are you hungry?" He nodded. She smiled. "Do you like stories?" Another nod. "How about one about a soldier and a girl who gave him a meal he never forgot?" Jonas placed a warm bowl of soup in front of the boy and sat beside him. As the three of them ate in the quiet glow of the morning, Nina looked around. The paint on the walls, the hand-drawn signs, the faces of people who had once felt invisible, now laughing together. This wasn't just a kitchen. It was proof that kindness could come back home. That one small act, a single meal, could turn into 100 open doors, 1,000 shared moments, a lifetime of second chances. And in the middle of it all stood Nina, the waitress who had fed hope and watched it grow.